Hello, my name is Miguel Amigot, and I'm the CTO of ibl.ai. So this is going to be a little bit of a technical overview about the way that we are seeing and implementing generative AI at scale for universities in an LLM agnostic way. The reason for that LLM agnosticism is to, first of all, acknowledge that the LLMs are in arms races against each other, right? And that's very good, right, for the university, because it means that in terms of pricing, well, things keep getting better and better. And then in terms of functionality, the arms race doesn't just get limited to the LLM and the inference API endpoint. It increasingly encroaches into the SDK, right, and the applications, right, that are being built. So, for instance, Gemini has great screen sharing, multimodal functionality, right? So this is something that, let's say, a university says, okay, well, I want to be sitting on top of all these LLMs, all these SDKs, and just using what is best for my students, right, from a pricing as well as application standpoint. So we're going to show you how we're thinking of this. Since this is a technical overview, we toggle the technical switch. And basically, we start off with a what we call a kind of a backend as a service, right? And this backend as a service is what supports every single application, okay, in our arsenal. Every single application talks to the same backend, talks to the same API. Right? Obviously, different applications can consume different subsets of API endpoints. Obviously, there are a lot, right? But we say, okay, well, we're going to have the backend be a single piece, right? And if we are let's say in a multi-tenant setting, well, we are going to be maybe deploying kind of the entire platform, right? So we deploy the entire platform, and then each subset of our audience is their own tenant, right? And then each subset can have departments and so on. And that's how we can have the fine-grained, access control. But this is going to be a founding principle, because it's going to allow us to define a common backend that, in this case, for example, it's OpenAPI-compliant. So we can have SDKs for JavaScript and for Python that allow us to say, well, even from a vibe coding standpoint, well, you can vibe code a front end, but it's going to be using a fixed backend, okay? And this is not going to be, vulnerable to leaking database credentials in the browser and things like that. So this is the first foundation, right? Is we're going to say, okay, the entire backend is going to be unified under a single API. It's going to be extensive. And from that single API, we're going to be building a number of web and mobile applications. So this is the first piece. Now, what is behind the API? So there are two directions to go into. One is the backend, and then the other one is, well, how are we consuming the API? So from the backend, we're going to start off with one piece that is effectively a learning management system. Now, why is a learning management system, as a foundational element of this important? Because for a lot of applications, especially in education, let's just say I create a course, right? And have AI agents, right, to create a course. Well, I, as the instructor, want to be able to see what is going on, right? And I want to have, obviously, authority, right, over what the AIs have created. So when you have, for example, an AI agent that creates a course, well, if you cannot have any control over that course, if you cannot modify it, then what use is that? It's like, well, you need to have that control. And if you're going to have control, right, over a course that has been created by an agent, then what better way to express that than through a learning management system? All right, so this is one piece of our platform that is important. Of course, the learning management system is going to also be able to speak in all the protocols that are important, right? So LTI is probably the most common one. You have to be able to LTI consume and LTI provide. That just really opens the floodgates, right, for possible integrations. So that's going to be one piece. The other piece is going to be the generative AI layer, right? And for the generative AI layer, well, you want to say, okay, where does it make sense for me to focus, and where does it make sense for me to leverage what exists, not only from the open source community, but from major players like Google, Microsoft. Today we're talking about Salesforce as well, right? So you want to be able to have these agents, right? In our case, we call them mentors, right? But these agents be able to leverage the best, right, from the underlying community that is, spending so much time building this, right? So if I have, for instance, a mentor that is what I call a mentor, is a layer of abstraction over the agentic frameworks of all these massive organizations, including the open source community. So for instance, right, tools like Flowwise over here, right, where I can, I don't want to be competing with Flowwise, right? I don't want to be competing with Microsoft's agentic system or Google's or Salesforce or anybody else's, right? Instead, I want to say, well, I'm going to have a mentor, what I'm going to call a mentor, and that's going to be a wrapper over any one of these systems. Okay. Now, if that happens, then whenever any one of these systems updates, for example, its SDKs, then I'm going to be able to very quickly compete, because I'm going to be able to very quickly incorporate that change, right? Let's say this example of, let's say, Gemini screen sharing, right? Or OpenAI's MCP's integration. Let's say I want to use that, right? Or OpenAI's, the way that they sort of take care of the chunking, right, for the OpenAI assistants and so on. Well, okay, if I want to be able to integrate that quickly, it's futile to be competing with OpenAI on implementing their API and their SDK faster, right? Like if OpenAI releases an API endpoint, they also release the SDK that consumes it. We don't want to be competing with OpenAI to write that code faster. Therefore, what's much easier is to integrate the latest version of the SDK. Okay. And now our mentors in our backends are effectively a layer of abstraction over these possible entities that are continuously being updated and improved. Like for example, if we can say, then this can go beyond SDKs, this can go into LangChain, for example, which we use, as well as LangFuse. But if Hugging Face contributes an update to the embeddings algorithms of LangChain, we want to be able to incorporate that easily. We don't want to be competing with Hugging Face now for the embeddings algorithm. So that layer of abstraction is very important at the backend, right? It allows us to really benefit, right, from the entire ecosystem. And then if we're clever, right, and we say, okay, well, this layer of abstraction, which is accessible through an OpenAPI-compliant API layer, and we can have SDKs for JavaScript and for Python and so on, then we can have that abstracted into, for example, an NPM package, okay? And from that NPM package, well, we can create our web applications, right? And these web applications can basically consume our backend. So we have many web applications, right? And the idea is for universities to be able to create their own applications, basically use the same backend to be able to say, okay, well, when I create a new application, I don't have to worry about developing everything here, right? Let's just say the backend is going to be a given, right? It's going to be a backend that already takes care of the SSO, it already takes care of LTI, all this kind of stuff. The front end is going to, let's say, the stack that we've chosen, right? So we have our SDK, and then at the front end layer, we're in the React family, right? So React, Next.js, right? And that allows us to tap into Vercel, right? It allows us to tap into Replit for mobile, okay, with the React Native family. So we say, okay, well, our front end is going to be effectively consuming our SDK and our backend. We're going to be, releasing, let's say, an NPM package, okay, because the NPM package is actually quite straightforward for others to be able to consume, right? And if we're able to do this, then we can get to a place where we are, let's say, safely vibe coding. Okay. Now, if we are in a position where we can say that, all right, any application that we develop, whether it's a web or a mobile application, is going to use a backend that is LLM agnostic and SDK agnostic, and that can be running into my infrastructure, then that has all sorts of implications in terms of control, in terms of pricing, and in terms of features. One is you always stay at the forefront, right? So if there is any development, right, from any of these big sort of agentic players, let's say, Google, Microsoft, etc., okay, very easy to incorporate. If I have to deploy this in, let's say, in any sort of infrastructure that I need, even in local or, let's say, edge devices, okay, that is also feasible. Now, by covering so much, by saying that so much of my code is going to be reusable, frankly, because let's say if I create all these kinds of front end applications that are using the same backend, then I really don't have to worry about, well, let's say from a testing standpoint, I have to make sure my backend is solid and secure and is scalable and so on. But if that is the case, then okay, the web applications that are built on top, well, have, they're when I build a new web application, there are certain things that I don't have to worry about, right? I don't have to worry about, okay, re-implementing logging or re-implementing, chat interfaces like that. That already exists. So I can reuse those elements from one application to another. And that's why, let's say, to summarize this becomes a kind of vibe coding product for education, right? It already has, our ready to go applications, right, that are being used by many instructors and students. But as far as the future is concerned, well, it's something that a university can say, okay, I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna be able to tap into any LLM or SDK that I wish, and I'm gonna have full control. And that is what ibl.ai is. Thank you.